Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start with introducing Chico San and the exhibition we have at the Kansas City Artist Coalition. This exhibition is called Freaks of Fashion, and we'll start with reading the artist statement. I'm going to go over to my other camera that I have set up and start with that. One second. Okay, artist statement. I often find myself wanting to deface something, or perhaps having a desire to add dialogue or imagery where my input is unnecessary or unwanted. Sometimes it is warranted and invited, as with collaborative efforts. I could be adding to an already bizarre composition or juxtaposing the bizarre with the mundane. I'm reacting to pre-existing imagery and what I superimpose onto that imagery. However, within these pages of paper dolls, I'm changing the overall mood or narrative with my imagery, without permission, with the intent to be absurd. In the series Freaks of Fashion, I'm taking the pages out of many different eras of paper doll fashion books and transforming them into an encyclopedia of beasts and creatures from some other dimension or universe, who somehow, through pure chance, found that perfect outfit or that special gala or cocktail party, for that special gala or cocktail party. Okay, so starting with the artist statement, Chico Stan, can we start with talking about your chosen art name that you use for your art practice?
Well, my nickname has been Chico for the majority of my life. I have an older brother, 7 years older than me. He's a larger person than I am. So I'm kind of the smaller of the two siblings. And he and his friends had different nicknames for each of them. They're all pretty nonsensical. But it just kind of stuck with my nickname. At some point, my mom caught on to that. And then my friends caught on to that, and then that just kind of became my moniker as an artist, and just kind of how I introduce myself to most people most times. Some people might know my name is James, but most people probably don't. But yeah, so I'm kind of like the small runt of the family. I'm the small guy. And yeah, it's just, there have been different variations of that nickname that other friends have kind of coined, and they're, Chico Malenko, the great magician, or Chico Brain Dead, or Chico San, or just various things over the years. It's pretty nonsensical, but Chico always stuck, and I don't know, in general, it just kind of seems appropriate for my brother and my relationship as far as big brother, little brother kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's where that comes from. Yeah.
All right, interesting. Yeah. Another question I had was, having some more time with your show, I'm interested in opening the conversation of how you envision or think about how other people interpret your work, especially this collection that we have here of yours.
I feel like for the most part, it's been interesting to hear how people relate to it, because it's nostalgic for some people. Those people who have played with paper dolls or any sort of paper sculpting of any sort, and so kind of brings them back to earlier days, maybe when that was more common. I myself used to cut out different types of sculpting. You cut out a piece of paper and sculpt it into something much like origami. So that'd be kind of like another form of paper manipulation and playing around with paper and three-dimensionality with a two-dimensional thing, I guess, material. But I don't know. I think for the most part, people do have that connection to it. Other people have mentioned just how, perhaps referencing the nature of fashion and beauty, different things that are surface, I suppose. Some people just enjoy how I interpret the different elements that are already there, and are curious to see how I create something with this imagery and how I fit my imagery into the pre-existing print. So it's been all over the place, really. And you know, some people may have issues with the fact that I'm painting on something that's you know, out of a copyrighted book or something like that. So I mean, I feel like any number of interpretations of it, as far as, you know, is this legitimate art, or is this something I can connect with? It's been interesting. It's certainly something different than what a lot of the things that I've done in the past. I have bought like on antique prints in the past and painted on them, you know, just old paintings and stuff like that, and I just start to add my own elements to it, much like I would if I were collaborating with another artist in person. And that's always a fun process for me. I really enjoy painting side by side with artists, or trading off with artists, and just seeing what kind of imagery can develop from that interaction. Because I kind of feel like that imagery wouldn't exist if it wasn't for another artist's involvement in it somehow or another.
Sure. So going off that, it seems there's a difference in how you talk about collaborating with artists that maybe are alive right now or that you have access to, and using or finding and using artwork that's been out there for maybe decades. If these paper dolls are from the 20s, and not having permission to do that, as far as like looking into the copyright realm of it. But it seems like maybe you're blending that into, like, you do have permission to do that. You're giving yourself permission to do that, but also within your artist statement, it states that you knowingly like to deface things and without the permission. So can you talk a little bit more about what that means for this body of work, that you are taking paper dolls from many different generations, and they are female figures, and knowingly defacing them with these, you know, monstrous characters?
Yeah, that's a good question. That I do have other books that do have male figures, so it's not a specific choice to do that with female type of characters, but it's pretty much just using what I have when it comes to this resource, and going with that. As far as my interest in defacing things or adding dialogue to things that didn't already have, you know, my hand involved in it, I think that goes that I'm referencing perhaps wanting to have a conversation with people that I don't know, and I'm having that without them knowing it, and that's again, I think that all kind of goes back to my interest in collaborating with other artists and imagery in general. I like to create that visual dialogue that creates some sort of narrative that didn't exist before I added to it or someone else added to it. Yeah, I mean, these pieces, I feel like with the paper doll books, specifically, it's a form of media that's, you know, it's been mass produced, and the intent is to be cut out of paper and folded up and perhaps ripped up and disposed of ultimately, and unless it's someone who's collecting the book as a whole collection or something like that. But it's actually a fun activity to play around with these two-dimensional things and, you know, create different scenarios with it. I enjoyed that when I was younger myself, and I know a lot of people who have connected in that way have done so as well. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say in a similar sense how people use newspapers or magazines with collage, and you're taking a lot of different elements and textures, and you're figuring out how to reformat it and create a different composition. And typically that's also without permission as well. And, you know, we're using a mass-produced form of media that's out there, it's everywhere. You can do with it what you want. A lot of times it's kind of disposable in a sense, but I like to try to use these old books that are, I don't think they're meant to be disposed of necessarily. I think these illustrations are wonderful. And dealing with different artists who have done these books and seeing how they've created their imagery is always kind of an interesting thing as well. So trying to change how I paint, my application of paint, or perhaps the aesthetic, to somehow meld in with these previous artists' works. So yeah, I think, I don't know. I think that's, maybe I've lost track of the questions at hand, but
okay. I think you touched on all of it for sure. So where do you see this, you said this series is going to continue, and you have other paper doll books, different decades, different genders. Do you feel like you might go beyond the framed pieces? And I know you have talked about the imagination that you put towards it, behind it, with giving it this narrative. Have you thought about working with writing about what these characters are doing, how they became how they are?
I hadn't thought about that. That's an interesting question. Like actually creating a story, like a written type of story about these characters. I haven't ever done that with any of the imagery that I've created, really. I can describe certain things that are perhaps more narrative than these pieces, and perhaps suggest what I was thinking, and perhaps a scenario that these characters might exist in. That's a really good question that I don't know. I'm compelled to think more about that, and maybe include that in different projects. As far as the future of this series, these are, this is a study of pretty much how far out there in some weird, bizarro world can I go with these pre-existing images. And just kind of having fun with imagery and creating imagery. The book that I have also completed that has to do with traditional Japanese garments, that I believe you both have seen some pictures of, that has to do with yokai and oni, mythological folklore creatures from Japan. So there's already stories involved with that. So in doing something like that with other mythologies from other cultures and religions, it's like I'm creating now a scenario for these creatures that they've probably never existed in before. These mythological characters, with that particular Japanese book, they're, most of them were wearing kimonos, so it was like a very formal type of engagement for like the two characters on each page, or sometimes there's 3 or more characters. And yeah, once again, just kind of trying to figure out how I can fit this imagery onto a page and have it make sense as far as the overall illustration is concerned, or the overall composition is concerned. I have some books that have, a half a dozen characters crammed onto a page, and so it's just like overlapping bodies, and I don't even know how I'm going to work with that, but it should be interesting one way or the other. just trying to figure out this puzzle that I'm creating as I go along. But yeah, that's kind of the idea behind this. I have other bodies of work that are being worked on as well, and I usually just kind of jump back and forth, sometimes between different types of media, even not even just like paintings or drawings. I really like to get back into sculpting and whatnot, working with something actually three-dimensional instead of creating something that looks three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface. So who knows? This will keep me busy for a while. I have at least a dozen other books like this. And yeah, I can tinker around with these things for a really long time for sure.
Great. We do have someone in our waiting room that is named Visual Soul. We don't know if we want to let them in or not.
Yeah, I know who that is.
Okay, good. Awesome. Just wanted to, yeah, we had some bombing earlier, so. Shoot, I had a question and I forgot it.
Yeah, Visual Soul is my buddy Rob Tapley, Mr. Bonnie. He was once in Kansas City. He's another local artist. He's in Topeka now, and yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
We do have one question, Ash, in the chat, and it's from Genevieve, and she says, "I've always been fascinated with your monsters or grotesque portrayals of images. Have you always done that style of art, and what made you start going in that direction?"
I've been doing that for a while. If it wasn't something kind of morbid or grotesque, it was usually something kind of bizarre, and a lot of times having to do with stream of consciousness sort of approach to how I create imagery. But I am a really huge fan of sci-fi movies and horror movies. A lot of the artists that I grew up liking are also kind of doing similar things. I grew up collecting Garbage Pail Kids and reading Mad magazines, so that sort of dark humor and satire has always interested me. Yeah, I mean, like, Genevieve, you may be familiar, like the zombie portraiture that I used to do back in the day. Like it was super morbid, and I tried to make it as approachable as possible, considering that these were like zombies, you know, posing for a family portrait or something like that. And yeah, just the humor that's involved with, like, how do you get together a bunch of zombies in a room to stand still for a portrait? You know, it's like trying to wrangle a bunch of cats or something like that. You know, it's just kind of tongue-in-cheek, dark humor like that. That's always been something I've been interested in as someone who enjoys film or other artists' work. And yeah, I mean, I still have a lot of Garbage Pail Kids. Like, I think that kind of satire is brilliant, and those artists are continuing to make that same thing that they have been doing for over 30 years. So it's like, I mean, I don't know. I'll never get tired of that type of humor and imagery. It's just fascinating to me. Yeah, makes me giddy.
Well, I think at this point we can open it up to anybody else that has joined us. Any other questions, comments?
I know, Chico, in conversation, you know, you and I have talked about going further with this series. Could you talk a little bit about where you see this series going beyond the ladies that are there tonight, you know, in the 20s kind of style, and then this Japanese book that you've been working on, talking kind of about where you're going from there?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting as far as like collaborating with artists with this particular type of format where you have different body parts that are left out because there's a paper doll. My friend Sharon, who was actually at the opening, she and I started this very similar type of collaborative process where she's created an image and I've created an image, and we were to trade back and forth at some point. So actually collaborating with artists with the intent of creating this paper doll format would be one way I could go about continuing this. But mostly it's, I don't know, like I really just kind of want to continue playing around with this imagery, and I don't know. I feel like a lot of projects and studies like these are just me trying to figure out how to create imagery that I haven't done before, particularly creatures and bizarre types of amalgamations of body parts or whatever. That typically leads into me working on other series of works where that type of application of paint or aesthetic might be more involved in a larger composition rather than just an image of a character on a white stark background, you know. So yeah, just really just having fun with this imagery. It's like I mentioned to you in conversation in the past, like it doesn't have to hold a lot of I don't know how to say this, like it doesn't have to be that significant when you're looking at it. I kind of like to create imagery that tends to be more ambiguous, just to allow the viewer to think about what they're seeing, and maybe they create their own narrative about it. I'm fascinated by how people perceive what I do, and a lot of ideas have come from people reflecting on what I've done in the past. So hopefully this could lead to that, and perhaps, like I was saying, like actually collaborating with other artists in a similar type of format. Yeah, I don't know.
I think it would be really interesting to see, like, just kind of playing on what Ash was talking about with the writing, of like taking your work and collaborating with a writer and having them mock up little stories and whatever, or just like responding to your work, whatever it is. It'd be an interesting experiment. Whether it goes anywhere or not, it'd be fun to see how people, you know, even community art, you know, where people could just like, what do you think's happening in these scenarios or something like that. It would be an interesting way to have people engage, because they are so, I mean, you can see with Ash's, like, pulling up a little bit closer on some of these pieces, there's just so much detail, you know, that you can't see by just cruising through. And it's just, there you go. It's so neat to spend some time with these, and it was really interesting for me as just someone that's with the work regularly, and then with the work with individuals in the space. A lot of people didn't know that these were paper dolls, and then a gentleman that is in his mid-60s immediately knew what they were, and he was like, these look just like paper dolls that I played with when I was a kid. And I was like, you nailed it, like that's exactly what they are. And it was just really fun to see that engagement. So
yeah, I've enjoyed that similar type of thing as well. When someone actually has an experience of interacting with these paper dolls from their past, and then just to see kind of how they respond to what I've done, as if I've just kind of created like perhaps a different matrix for this imaginative process to kind of have, you know, take the stage, you know. When it comes to like the paper doll books themselves, you have perhaps a couple models that you cut out and then you place them behind in different outfits. So it's limited in that way. Whereas, yeah, I just kind of like want to go for it and just try to be as bizarre as possible based on like the elements and the textures and details that already exist, and the actual aesthetics of the illustrations themselves. I have yeah, I have quite a few different books with, there are like perhaps 4 or 5 different artists that are represented through those different books. So, and those styles of illustrating vary pretty drastically, actually. But I forgot what I was going to say. As far as like having some sort of interactive, perhaps public piece, doing collaborative projects like that with community and whatnot can be a lot of fun. A lot of times in the past, it's just been me and a handful of friends who are getting together, and, or, you know, one artist creates something and then they trade it off to someone else and they bring it home, they do their work on it. And so you're really just kind of letting go of what you've created to allow something else to happen. And I think that could be a pretty interesting community thing too, where you just kind of keep adding to it. Blanking on the name. There's this documentary called Cave of Forgotten Dreams. It's about a somewhat recently discovered cave in France that is even older than the Lascaux caves, and the cave paintings and the people who lived there, how they've studied that. But these cave paintings were essentially like a very similar type of collaborative process. You'd have one era of people living in these caves who would create something on these walls, illustrate whatever they were seeing, and try to tell a story in their manner. And then as the millennia would go by and different generations of people would continue to go through there, there'd be layers of like calcified layers that would pretty much seal in the previous layer of painting, and then more recent people living in those caves would add to it. So there's this continual story that people were creating and adding to, and those were all just kind of solidified in time in these calcified walls and these caves. And I really like the idea of that, as far as how humans tend to interact and communicate, and when it comes to some sort of creative project like this, how multiple people come together to create something that wouldn't have been done just by one individual. Which, you know, like I've never been in a band before, I'm not a musician or anything like that, but I can only imagine that would be a pretty similar experience to where you have different ingredients, different people's ideas that are coming together. And I really like that. I really enjoy collaborating with artists. My buddy Rob, Visual Soul, who's on this chat now, he's one of my friends who I've collaborated with quite a few times in the past. Yeah, it's always a good experience. I think it's a good learning experience. I think it kind of helps. It's helped me to understand it. Just, you know, a lot of things are impermanent for sure, and just to be able to like let go of different things that you've created, and, you know, things that you've done, so other people can have their voice, or, you know, just kind of letting life flow on. You know,
Collaborating is hard, especially in the arts. It's not something everybody can do, because, you know, your art is your art. It's
yeah,
a hard thing to let go.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see like someone paint over it, or you know, add to it or whatever. But at the same time, it's kind of like you know, the final thing that takes place wouldn't have been possible if there weren't all these additional perspectives and individuals with varying, you know, techniques and processes and stuff like that. So yeah,
I'm gonna let somebody else in, just FYI, so hold tight. And if we have an incident, I apologize. The person's coming twice now. Sorry.
Oh, hello. I do find that really interesting about talking about the history of where these pages have been and what you've done to them, and they wouldn't be here unless you got your hands on them. So I find that's interesting, and how it coordinates, it kind of parallels to your collaboration practice. So I can see that now that we've talked about it. It's interesting.
Yeah, and the hands that it's passed through to get to me were, you know, 2 different friends who were essentially like, one was gifting it to another, and then they gifted it to me, and it was all relevant because of what, you know, the two of us were doing as far as artists are concerned. You know, one being a designer with fashion himself and creating his own outfits, and then, you know, handing it off to me because he acknowledged that I was super stoked about being able to just create whatever I wanted on it, and he was excited for me about that. So, yeah, that in a sense was a kind of a collaborative process as well.
Nice. And I think you did mention that the pages that when you did receive them, they didn't have faces at all. And that was like a whole artistic license that you took. And some of them have like really wild, crazy monster faces. I'm curious, do you ever get stuck on one type of creature and way that you kind of transform the figure itself? Do they come back and maybe you find that same kind of style on another page? Always like very different characters each page.
Yeah, and that has more to do, I'd say, with the designs that are being illustrated in these pages. That book in the 20s, there are some high fashion design firms that are being represented there, you know. So design companies and designers who have been in that particular type of art for decades, you know, perhaps over a century in some cases. So yeah, it never really gets old or anything like that. It's like each page is something new that I can kind of explore and discover. As far as the different books are concerned, based on perhaps the style of illustrations that are available, that can change how I approach the painting. And so far, it's been two different artists that I've been working with in these pages. There are a couple whose illustrations seem very, I don't know, like it's kind of rough compared to the illustrations in these pages. It's almost like really old animation. So some illustrators have a better sense of realism, I guess you could say, and then there's a couple illustrators who are in these books who are already pretty abstract in a sense. So that could create a new type of challenge for me. Like I might have to like think about how I'm going to try to seamlessly fit my imagery into this imagery and make it look intentional based on what was already pre-existing there.
Yeah, I can definitely see that with these this series, is that the style of your painting is really a smooth transition from what was already on the page. You can hardly tell the difference, but knowing that that's happened, that's the process, it is impressive to see.
Thank you.
Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions. Or not.
Yeah, Rob.
Or just have conversations.
Yeah.
They don't have to be questions. You can make comments on the work or whatever.
That's what you see me now.
Please.
Hey, what's up? I think you can hear me now.
Yep.
What's up, brother?
Not much. How you doing?
Hey, man, I want to piggyback on what you were saying about the collab and like the spontaneity of that. And you talked to my homeboy, Jeremy McConnell. He's putting together a style body show.
Okay.
So, I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and I think he's just kind of getting started in the idea. So I know you've done some of those before, so maybe you can talk about that, how like we get handed a piece, you know, that we don't know what we're getting handed sometimes.
Totally.
Or vice versa, like we do a painting that's kind of half, or, you know, if you can kind of pick up and explain that a little bit.
Yeah, because that's actually a process that's different than how you and I have collaborated in the past.
Yeah.
Where we're sitting together side by side. There could be, 2, 5 people just hanging around the same pieces or whatever all night long.
Oh yeah.
But with the Beware All Style Biters show, and with Jeremy, what he does with those projects are like, yeah, you really don't know what you're getting, and you're handed off this piece. Sometimes it's a little bit more completed than other pieces, so you have a lot of opportunity to. I mean, you could be painting the majority of the painting yourself once you get someone else's painting. Just kind of depends on what the other person has done already, and it's always a surprise. You won't actually see until we all get back together again, and then you have 2 artists working on each piece, with each artist working on 2 separate pieces a lot of times, and that's been interesting because you don't have any sort of input or dialogue with the other artist while they're doing that, which is something new to me before working with you all on that. But I think it's relevant in the same manner in that I don't know, just kind of allowing yourself to just allow things to kind of happen and step away from it after you've done your part in it, and not get too tied down to this thing that you've done, no matter how into it you might be. It's just kind of impermanent, a lot of things are, but
Yeah.
and
Right.
it's interesting to see what comes of it, because again, it could be like, the collaborative process could work really well, and you could be stoked about it, or you might be like, oh well, maybe something different will happen next time. But it's still kind of the same thing, where it's like the final imagery wouldn't have been possible without the 2 people involved or whoever else is involved, and that's always been a lot of fun. We just kind of off the dome, stream of conscious kind of take on how you approach art and how you just how you consider it after you've done your part in it, and it's a nice feeling. It can be kind of stressful, but I think it's a nice release to just kind of be able to step back and just let go of things sometimes like that.
I think it's kind of like catching a frisbee or something, like with like no heads up, like someone's
Right.
like here, and now you're like thanks, or it can slap you in the neck, of course, but hopefully, but yeah. Hey, I have like a fan here that wants to ask you a question. You want to ask him a question?
Can I see a fashion plate or a paper doll?
Live.
From a non-artist point on the collaboration thing, Chico, I love when I see things that Robert's done with friends of his from near and far and other collaborations. So from someone who's not a creator, but just, someone who appreciates it, I really see him light up anytime he gets to tell me who else he's been in those pieces with, or he shares that. So it just creates a whole different medium, if you will, when these artists come together and do these collabs. I fully support it. I love meeting you, and I love your fashion plates and paper dolls. Maybe someday I'll get one.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I need to make it out to Topeka to see you guys.
You just come on.
That'd be sweet, brother.
Yeah.
It's good seeing you.
Yeah, it's a great experience. I've of course, during this pandemic, everybody's pretty limited as to what they can do. There's always been projects where people will create something and send it in the mail. It could just be like a postcard or something like that. You just keep creating enough. We've done different like book type of trade-offs where people just add 2 different pages of the book and have that be sort of the collaborative process.
So, yeah, like a traveling sketchbook or something.
Yeah. And it's great to be able to connect with other people in that way, especially now when people are unable to connect in the ways that they would like to. So
that's a really good point. Yeah, that's really good.
Love that concept. That can really keep going on and on forever. Like even with these pieces, you could just keep going with it. How do you know when it's done?
Yeah, I guess perhaps with any body of work, I think whenever I start to become more involved with another project that might need more of my time and effort, these types of studies, I'll probably always return to them and revisit them. And I'm just kind of surprised actually how this project has gone, and my own interest in continuing to pick up more books. So I may not even ever get to paint all of these books, but it's still something to look forward to for myself. I sent you, Ash and Marissa, like some images of like the newer still lifes and previous pieces that were kind of similar to those. So that's kind of an ongoing series as well. I tend to jump back and forth between different bodies of work and the subject matter that's involved with them, and the content. Really, it could be pretty nonsensical, absurd stuff like what you're seeing with the paper dolls, where it's just like, yeah, this is just my imagination and just having fun. Or it could be more poignant and I'm trying to say something, so it varies. I think it varies with the times and just the seasons and whatnot. But yeah, it's always nice to have a couple different projects going at once. Just kind of keeping busy and staying productive and trying to understand my own vision a little bit better. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.